How do we now make these images dynamic and change based on our selections from the player screen? So these we're going to have to, let's go back to the code view. We are going to have to edit and add to these button click functions, because we can't just change the screen. We need to also do something else. If we are thinking about going to this results page, we need to know what the player selected, right? So we're going to need a container or a variable that has stored the player selection from this screen. So if we're talking about variables, let's go to the very top and declare a var, stands for variable, player. We're going to call it player, and we're going to put nothing in it at the very start. So when we run this application, it starts here, it sets up a variable, and then it sets up all the events for all the buttons that it can see, and then it just stops and waits for further instructions. So we want to set it as blank, because when we first start, we're starting and we haven't made a selection yet, but we have set up a variable, an empty container that we can put a selection in. When we get here, we need to, after we click on a button, we're going to want to put inside of this empty container our selection. So whether that be rock, paper, or scissors. So this is very easy. We go into one of the selections. First, I'll go into the rock button click event, making sure I'm inside of the curly brackets of the function. And we will set the player variable to, you guessed it, rock. I'm going to copy this line because in the paper, I'm going to be setting the player variable to paper and scissors to scissors. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, what does that do? Because when we run that, there's nothing here still. But we now have access on this screen to a variable with the player's selection. And we can also do something when we get to this screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a custom function here, because we need to do a few things when we get to the results screen. We need to do a number of things that if we did inside of every button here, we will be tripling up the code. So instead of putting the code in here 3 times for each button click, we'll put it in a single function down here, and then we'll just call it once from each of these 3 buttons. It'll make sense in a second. So we're going to call this function results page, and we'll open the brackets and open a curly, and then go down and make sure there's a closing curly. So everything in between these 2 curlies will fire or will be processed by the compiler when we call the results page function. So the first thing we need to do is we want to actually edit the image. So I'm going to reset. I'm going to go back to our results page and just go to the design view and make sure I remember, see, we didn't rename these IDs of these elements that we dragged in, which are image elements. You know, like we always rename the labels and we always rename the buttons. We forgot to rename the images. So this is going to be image underscore player. And this is going to be image img underscore computer. Now, these properties, all these properties here, can be changed using code. So if I go into the code and I say image computer width, I want to change the property of the width to whatever, 200, it will do it when I click a button, let's say. So this even includes the image property. We can change this image property. You remembered that we uploaded all these images. We can change it to simply any of these images in here. And the way I've named these images is very important. So if you're creating your own images, you need to maybe name them something, well, first of all, relevant to what the image is. For instance, this is obviously the paper, so I've called it paper, but I put a C underscore at the front to say this is the computer's version of the paper. And this is the P, player's version of the paper. So P underscore. So I know I can just, we will see. I'll explain it in code now. So knowing that we can change the property, let's go back to our code. In this results page, we know now that we have a selection made in a player variable. So let's change this image. How do we change the image? We set property. And we're going to set property. The first attribute or the first thing that inside of this image set property function is the object. So the image player is the object, remember, because that's what we named this object. This object is called the image player. I'm just going to set it to, can we set this to nothing? Hang on, let's set it. Okay, this will make more sense now. So this is the image object element, and at the moment I've got nothing in there. It's empty. And we can put any image that is available in the assets under here. We can set it. We can set this image, that image, whatever image that we like. All we need to do is give it the file name, and the file names are here. So let's go back to the code. So set the property of this empty box, which we called the image player. I'm not going to set the width. What do I want to set it to? Well, what do I want to set? I want to set the image property, not the width. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to change this to image. And here is the value or the file name that I need to put in. Now, I could just simply put in player underscore paper.png, and that would set it to paper. Well, let's run it. Let's see. Start. Even though I click scissors, I don't know why that didn't. We haven't called the function yet. Sorry. Let's go back. So when I clicked one of those buttons, what did I click? I clicked paper. This is all we did, right? So I didn't actually get into this function and call this function. So let's call this function. Let's make sure we're calling this function. So after we set the variable, we want to call this function, make sure there's an ending semicolon in every single one of these buttons. And that will make sure we set the screen to the result screen. We set the player's variable to whatever the button is. So this is scissors. In this case, it's setting it to scissors. And then we're going and navigating to all the code inside of the results page function. And that happens on every button. So let's run now. Start, I'm going to click scissors. It's gone to hand or paper, sorry, not hand. It's gone to paper because that's what we set it to, right? I'm going to play again. I'm going to go rock. It's setting it to paper still because we've hard coded that in. So how do we make this dynamic? And how do we make that to whatever button that we click? So we already know that inside of the player variable, we have the name of the option that we set. So all we have to do is replace this part of the file name. So I'm going to end the first part of the file name because we know that the player files all start with a P underscore, right? So we need to say that. And then we need to say plus the player variable, because inside of the player variable has either scissors, paper, or rock, right? And then we need to plus again because we need to end the file with the .png. So this section is the .png. If we go to our design view again and go to the results, click on here. We have the player. So all the player images start with a P underscore, and then in the player variable, we've got what they made or their selection. So that's either paper or rock or scissors. And then we know that every image also ends with a .png. So we have to put that in as a static. So let's go back to the code, and here it is. So we've got the start plus the player variable, which is either rock, paper, or scissors, plus the .png. And that will change it. If we run and test scissors, that will change it to whatever we select. Play again. I'm going to go rock. changed it to rock. To paper, changed it to paper. Back to rock. And so on. So that's how we change the players selection. We still have the hurdle of making the computer selection and doing all that automatically. So I think we'll do that in the next video just to break these things up again. Before we do that, we're going to put some comments in. I'm just going to copy my layout for a nice comment for a function, and I'm going to say this is the results page function. So everything in here is to do with the results page function. All right.